Kare Shalom everyone, welcome to our watercolor journey. We're painting this easy snowy landscape today, and as always the materials used are listed in the description below, and on the palette we have French ultramarine and Van Dyke brown, only two colors today. The paper is taped to the board and Heinrich is going to wet it thoroughly with a large Hake brush. And this is a Pro Art Hake and it is a 1.5 inch. So it's nice and big and you don't have to rub over the paper a lot. Because it's so wide, you can just put the water down and it is actually quite nice to use such a big brush. He's really soaking this paper today. Okay. In the palette there, he made a premix of French ultramarine and Van Dyke, and at the moment there, it's more French ultramarine and less Van Dyke. So he's starting off with the Raphael Petit Gris and a very soft brush. And as you can see, the ultramarine has got a little bit of a grayish tint. That's because of the Van Dyke that he added. Ultramarine is also a super granulating paint, so it gives that effect of snow falling in the sky, or from the sky rather. And by adding different amounts of the Van Dyke and the ultramarine, he creates variation in the color of the sky. Don't be afraid to use the brown in your sky. It really gives a more natural gray, like you would have when it's a cloudy or overcast sky. The main thing with this painting, or this type of painting, is you have to really have a light touch. He added a little bit of water at the bottom just to help the paint flow, and now he's tilting the paper a little bit to spread the pigment a little bit all over. And you can see at the bottom, because it's the grayish color that's siphoning down from the top, it already gives a few shadows for the foreground area. And we're not going to really paint a lot on the foreground because the pigment has to create the shadows, and you want to preserve as much white as you can to have the white snow with a shadow. Now, to make snow, the white snow, you need to actually paint shadows. So there you can see the paper is still very wet. So before you carry on, let it settle a little bit. If you paint directly, your paint is going to disperse so much that you won't have any effects there. So let the paint settle a little bit. The sheen should come off a little bit. Okay, so he's on the Rosemary & Co. Kolinsky Sable number 8 round. One magnificent brush. And he started with a more brownish mix and starting to put in the trees. And as you can see, as he swipes the brush, he picks up the residue of the ultramarine and he's added some brown. So play around with the two colors. They mix very, very nicely. At the end, I'm going to give you some more tips about what you can do with this ultramarine and Van Dyke mix. Very quick tips. So have a listen for those. Alright, so he's painting the background trees. Now this is supposed to be a hazy, snowy landscape, so there's no real definition. It is just the idea, the illusion of trees in the background. Now Van Dyke and ultramarine are both fairly warm colors, so here you have to add more pigment or less pigment to make your trees look further away or closer to you. So less pigment makes them lighter and they go back, more pigment makes them darker, so they come to the front. For the foreground here, it's the same mix, and he's using the side of the brush and he is really very lightly swiping it over the wet paper. Wet in wet still, and the combination is still in the palette of the French ultramarine and the Van Dyke, and sometimes it's a little bit darker, like you can see. It looks very stark and dark now, but remember, watercolor dries back quite a lot. So don't stress too much if you think your color is a little bit dark. It will become a lot lighter. The French ultramarine granulates so beautifully. It gives such a natural effect. Okay, now to create the effect of snowflakes falling. So we're going to look at the foreground now, the absolute foreground. So he's going to now add salt to give you the illusion of the snowflakes. Now you don't have to add a ton of salt. Just sprinkle it where you want the snowflakes to appear. So it's very lightly adding a little bit of salt to the foreground. And here you need to let it dry naturally. Your paint is still wet, your salt is still wet, and if you use a blow dryer, it is going to disperse everything and destroy your painting. Right, so now it's dry, and he is going to start adding more details. He's feeling if the paint is dry enough, and he's using the Rosemary & Co. Sable Blend rigger. Whoa, what a beautiful rigger. It is the best. Because those trees are in the background, they are only suggestions. So you can see that he's very lightly drawing in a branch here and there, or a trunk, very, very faintly. Not a lot of detail. So a few strokes, that's it, that's all you need. On the right hand side here, he is using the natural layout of the salt to help him to create the twigs and branches of the shrubs that he has in the front. So use what you have. The texture or the pattern that the salt created can sometimes lead you to make really interesting little shrubs or bushes. So just use your imagination and follow the natural curves of the salt. This is supposed to be a very dry, cold landscape. So the foliage, or not foliage, the trees and things are really stark, dark, bare, cold. And that is the image that you want to create here. Always remember that you have to ground all your objects so that it does not look as if it's floating in the air, and that is why he is giving a little bit more attention to the bottom of the shrub there to make sure that it is grounded. To balance out the painting, he's going to create a tree just off center of the middle. You don't want to paint something like this, the focus point right in the middle of the page, because it would tend to split your painting in halves. So it is better to just do it a little bit off center. So he's making this very stark bare tree here, and that is going to be the focus point of the painting. And here he's still using the rigger, and he is going to just give it a lot of bare branches, a thin, cold, bare tree. Notice that the branches are a little bit thicker and more detailed than the ones in the back, and it's also quite a lot darker because you want to bring this object to the front, bring it more into the foreground, and that is why it is more detailed and a little bit darker. As promised earlier, let's talk a little bit about French ultramarine and Van Dyke brown. French ultramarine is highly granulating, so the two of them together can give you a very good variation in texture. Also, by mixing them together, you can get a variety from a nice warm brown to a really cool gray to an almost black. The more ultramarine you add, the more granulating it gets, like you can see here at the top. The more brown you add, the less the granulation. The more brown will give it a little bit more warmth, and the blue makes it a wee bit cooler. And of course, adding more blue will make the brown darker, so you can get an almost black with the mixture. If you add more water, it will become a little bit grayer. Like you can see in the painting, there was a lot of water there in the foreground, and the paint was by itself quite watery. So it gives you the more grayish, purple gray color. So the two colors together, perfect for a limited palette painting. By varying the height of the different shrubs in the painting, it brings it forward or pushes it back. So you can see the one on the left is a little bit lower than the tree in the middle, so that brings it a little bit more forward. So you can bring your objects in your painting more forward by using a colder or a warmer color, and by painting it higher or lower on the picture plane. Here he's using the side of the rigger just to add the illusion of some more things growing, little rocks, just dabbing it in there to give you illusions of things that happen. It's a loose landscape, so illusion is the big thing. And yes, of course, splattering. You always do some splattering to create the texture. It is a very good tool to help you to create texture. He's using the rigger to splatter, and it gives very fine dots. If you use a bigger brush, it would give you bigger dots. Okay, and he's always signing his paintings. So this one he signed on the left. You can sign on any side you want. And there we have it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Vaya con Dios.